Welcome, everyone. My name is Barbara Petroselli. I lead marketing at Podium Data. I want to thank you for joining us today on our webinar focused on data catalogs in data lakes and as the secret weapon for big data insight. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our speaker, but before I do that, I want to make a couple housekeeping remarks. First, today's webinar is being recorded. Tomorrow, each of you will get an email with a link to the recording, which you can share with all your friends and family. We are going to ask you today if you could hold questions to the end of the presentation because we have quite a bit of material to cover, although we will make sure we leave time for questions. You should enter your questions by using the question function in the GoToMeeting console that I believe all of you are seeing. If you would like a copy of today's slides, send me a little chat note and I will send those off to you. For those of you who might have colleagues who registered but couldn't make it today, we will also send them a copy of the recording that they can listen to at their leisure. So I think that covers housekeeping. Chris Ortega is our guest speaker today. Chris is officially the Senior Director of Customer Success at Podium. He has been with the company more or less since its inception. And he's really the key guy with his team that helps to drive our customers from a decision to invest in our technology to full deployment and success. And beyond Podium, he's been working for decades in this industry, doing a lot of the hands-on project leadership and technical work around both data lakes and their precursors around analytic appliances, data warehouses, and enterprise data management projects. So he has a lot of deep expertise in this topic. And so with that, I want to turn things over to Chris.
Thank you, Barb. As if the picture weren't enough to age me, you had to throw in decades. Thank you. So this is the focus of our conversation today. As many of you know, many data lake projects have run into problems that have slowed deployment or prevented the lake from being made available to the business users at any significant scale. These problems include a wide variety of issues around lack of data quality, security, governance, lineage, and search, just to name a few. At Podium, we've worked with dozens of large organizations to remediate and revive these early data lakes and to fix these problems so that the lake can be put into full production and begin providing data analysts and other business users with the promised faster and simpler access to trustworthy, transparent, business-ready data. Out of that experience, we've developed a point of view that the integration of a data catalog into the lake right alongside the data itself with strong metadata management processes is an absolute essential prerequisite to operationalizing the lake, getting it fully deployed in the business, and allowing data scientists and business users to begin driving insight from the lake to support the business. So today, I want to walk you through 8 specific ways that we see the catalog driving insight from a data lake, or what we call a data marketplace. You'll hear me use those terms interchangeably. We'll take each of them and look at how Podium is using the catalog within our product, the Podium Data Marketplace, to deliver this insight. So let's get started. The first important idea is to recognize that the data catalog is only as good as the metadata it's built upon. And the quality of that metadata depends upon the presence of strong underlying processes that constantly collect, create, organize, and leverage metadata through the data preparation process. We believe that this metadata needs to exist side by side with the data itself, both in order to be constantly up to date and accurate, and to enable action against the data itself. This point will become clear as we look at some examples of how the catalog enables insights. But before we go there, let's look at an example of a strong metadata process. In order to have a complete metadata process, you need to first start with your source metadata. You need to validate everything that comes in. A rich metadata catalog contains profiling information. You need to also understand whether you have sensitive information in the lake. You need to govern all of that. You need to document it, track lineage, and control user access. At every point in the data preparation and delivery process, new data is being collected, created, organized, and then applied to make data in the lake more useful and to enable delivery of new insights to the business. So now let's look in more detail at how this process starts when data is first onboarded into the lake. The first way that a data catalog drives insights is by improving data quality, and that starts at ingest. Here's one example of how this happens in Podium. We start, regardless of source type, by registering the source metadata. And in so doing, we now have a basis under which to validate that information. In a single pass, we will go through that information, validate it at both a record and a field level, and put it into a readable format. These are the first 4 steps of the wheel. We're going to source it, profile it, validate it, and identify sensitive information through this process. And there'll be more on that in a little bit. Here's an example of what you would see once that onboarding process is done, including the collection of the source metadata, validation, profiling, and PII detection. This becomes useful in all the other downstream parts of the data preparation and delivery process. Most immediately, information from the validation process is presented to the user in the form of good, bad, and ugly records from that data set and the reason for their being classified as such. Again, this is an example of the first way that the catalog delivers insight, namely by improving data quality. The second way the data catalog creates insight is by exposing the content of each data set. At a high level, here's how that works in Podium. First, it starts with profiling every field of data coming into the marketplace. Next, that profiling information is paired with a rules engine, a pattern matching engine, to identify insights about the field. It might be a social security number. Is this a credit card? Additionally, we can also identify duplicately loaded data. Next, you begin to flag that data based on whatever insights you've identified. You can set properties, add tags, comments to document what was identified and how. And then lastly, you take action on the insight. So, for example, you can automatically obfuscate PII data based on what you found. Or you can generate a report of all duplicately loaded data so that a data steward can take steps to call out the duplicates. That's the overall process. Let's take a closer look at the first step, data profiling. Profiling data for each field exposes the exact content, quality, and structure of each field as it comes into the lake. In this case, we're looking at an entity, and we've selected a handful of profiling statistics in order to show you the nulls, how many unique values, min and max. However, in Podium, we actually calculate a much larger set of statistical values, roughly 75 or so for each field. And users can decide through the UI which ones to include in views like this. But what if you wanted to go further and get more information about, say, this last name field? I can actually click and view a data distribution of values. So in this case, what I'm looking at is actually a breakdown of the most common last names observed in this data set. The third way the catalog exposes insights is by allowing us to begin to automatically identify patterns in data. And PII is a great example of this. So imagine you've onboarded this set of data into the lake, including a field called email, which is most likely PII. As part of that process, one of the steps is to bump the profile for all fields against a pattern matching engine to identify PII. You'll remember back on our trusty wheel we looked at earlier, that was step 4 in the metadata process. Once that onboarding is finished and new PII has been detected and protected and metadata about it has been added to the catalog, how might that information be presented to the people responsible for managing the lake and its contents, or for that matter, to data governance, risk, or data security specialists? Let's take a look. So here are a few tags that have been applied to that email field. Potential sensitive email field name matcher, email data matcher. These were automatically generated and tagged by the pattern matcher on ingest as potentially sensitive fields and are now searchable across the entire lake. Yep. Likewise, new comments or blog entries can be added into the catalog for that field. Back on our metadata wheel, one of the steps was called business tagging, which meant adding tags or comments on the quality, completeness, and usability of the data. This is a really good example of what this looks like in practice. The data delivery person or data steward can add comments through the application to better define the data. But what they are really doing is adding new metadata into the catalog that makes it richer and more useful. And in the future, anyone considering using this data has the benefit of that insight. In this case, these entries, again, were made automatically as part of the data identification.
Chris, actually, can I interrupt you with a question just
You
to
sure can.
break it up? One question that came here now is, how is the data capture conditions applied to the data profiling process? I guess maybe another way to say that is all the parameters that you can set upon in onboarding, whether it's an update, or how do those affect how the profiling process happens?
Sure, great question. So Podium is a completely metadata-driven system, meaning that when you register the source metadata with Podium, what you're really doing is setting a bunch of both technical properties as well as some business properties. And they drive the behavior of the ingest. So for instance, if you didn't want to profile a given entity, you could set the profiling property to false. The profiling as well is based upon data type. If there are numerics involved in the data, numeric calculations like mean and standard deviation are calculated, as opposed to the example I just showed you with last name, which is string data, where mins, maxes, and frequency distributions are more appropriate. I hope that answered the question.
And if it doesn't, just put in another question and we'll come back to it and keep going.
Yes, you can reserve the right for a follow-up. And then the last thing related to PII is the ability to protect the information once you've identified it. And here what I'm showing you is a screen where, based upon our rules engine, we've automatically masked this field or set this field as being sensitive and applied a masking method to be applied to that data so that it's automatically under control, and you can configure these rules again however you'd like.
Oh, and before we move on, there is another PII question, which is the sensitive/PII data that's obfuscated stored in Podium, or is the source data updated? So more broadly, how does the obfuscation that Podium applies, what's the scope of its application?
Sure, great question. The Podium approach is to source data from application systems. We do not apply any updates to those sources, so they become read-only. And our platform is really designed to manage information within the marketplace, the Podium managed marketplace. And so we'll deal with encryption or masking on publish, those sorts of protection as it relates to the marketplace, but we don't go back to those sources, nor do I think we should.
And one more, and then I promise we'll keep going.
No, this is good.
How are the tags inferred? How do we need to do anything before the tags to get inferred? So maybe it's about how you set up the matching engine?
Set up the rules engine. Yeah, no, another great question. So the rules engine really drives off of a couple of basic things. One is a matching method, and we support really two methods. One is pattern matching. So you could take something like Lund's algorithm for credit cards and apply that as a pattern match. We can also do dictionary matches, where if you have a set of known values, maybe in the PHI space, a set of ICD-9 or ICD-10 diagnoses codes, right? We can do a lookup against that dictionary and see if we see values that fall within there. And then what you do is you define actions to take thereafter. Right? You might just tag, you might also obfuscate, right? You actually drive what happens in terms of the specific tag, how you tag it. It's all under your control.
Excellent. Okay, carry on, Chris.
Carrying on. A fourth way the catalog adds value is by enabling reuse. So this could be the reuse of data sets or data preparation workflows. Essentially, one user can go into the data catalog and see all the other things other people have done. But wait, that assumes, of course, that they have the appropriate access privileges, and more on that in a second. But they can either start from scratch or build upon the work of someone else. So here's one example of how this works in practice. This is the data preparation designer canvas in Podium. This is where a person could build their own data set for a specific analytic project or data need. They can select one or more tables of data, in this case 3, from the overall catalog and combine it through transformations, filters, and joins to build new data sets, in this example 2. After they've finished their work, others can either reuse those 2 target data sets or the entire preparation workflow for some other need. This ability to reuse and build upon each other's work requires a data catalog, because that's where the work of other people's persisted, organized, and made available over time. So, as many of us have heard, one of the key promises of the data lake is that a data-savvy business user should be able to go and get their data off the lake in a self-serve basis. But this is only possible, we've found, if there's a data catalog which allows people to search the collection and find what they need, understand the data, and then use it in the data sets that they build. This is the 5th way that the catalog exposes insights from the marketplace. So what we see here is the ability through our UI to search not just by table name, not just by field name, but all of that rich business metadata, the tags, the business name, etc., and quickly find the things that are of interest to you. And it isn't just the presence of a catalog that makes self-service access available. There are 2 other things you need to do as well. First, you need a GUI that people with few or no programming skills can work with the data on the data lake through. Without that, self-service is limited to only a small group of people with strong technical skills. Frankly, I wouldn't be able to do it. The second requirement is that data be business ready, meaning that the data is well documented and described, has lineage, and is cleansed and conformed enough to meet that particular user's skill set and data needs. So there's a little bit more that you have to do beyond a data catalog to really enable self-service, but at the end of the day, the data catalog is core and key to that process.
Before you move on, Chris, a
Yes,
question
ma'am.
came in that I think harks back to the prepare piece and the data reuse piece, and that was, how is it possible to build a custom transformation, or is it?
Custom transformation. So technically, right, any transformation is custom, right? You're brought into a designer canvas. I'll go back to the slide. And each one of these objects across the top has a certain behavior that you define. All of those become metadata, actually lineage metadata, that define how you want to transform that information. So for instance, in the transform module, there's a list of about 100 different functions you can apply to data in order to, concatenate fields, sub-select fields, do whatever it is that you want to do. And additionally, we provide the capability to import source-to-target mappings, right, from external systems. So our transform object will bring in a source-to-target mapping with business rules, and as long as they're syntactically correct, we'll apply those.
Okay. And another question that I'll just put in here now is a question. It says, does Podium support both structured and unstructured data, which I think also gets to mainframe and XML. And
yeah, and it's a great question. So Podium supports, obviously, much of what I've talked about in terms of validation and profiling is focused on the structured space. And to be perfectly honest, that's where we see 90% of the issues that our customers are dealing with to be. But we are often asked about unstructured data. And oftentimes, when we peel that back a little bit and ask, well, what unstructured data? Folks will say, well, I've got weblogs that I want to load up, or I've got emails that I want to load. And the reality is that both of those are structured data. In other words, a weblog has a certain format, as does an email. It does have sections of free-form text that can be loaded and parsed subsequently. So, from the structured, unstructured standpoint, we're focused on structured, and what we find is that people lump a lot of things into unstructured, which we would typically include things like sound files or, video files, right? Those sorts of things into the unstructured category.
Yeah, and that's not the focus here.
Right.
Those, quite frankly, those kinds of files. Great. I know there's a couple more questions, but I'm going to let Chris keep going, and I'll jump in a bit to just break it up. So carry on.
Thank you. He's on a roll. So the other thing that, the other benefit that the catalog drives is improved collaboration. And I'd like to show you just a sample of many in terms of collaboration within the platform that it illustrates the point. The data provisioning process historically has traditionally involved a lot of different teams and tools, including ETL folks, data modelers, data quality experts, data stewards, data owners, risk, compliance, etc. And each of these people plays a role in that preparation and delivery process. But in the past, they usually used different tools to do their jobs and essentially pass data from one group to the next as the process continued. And this makes collaboration difficult, right? Because everyone has different access to and a different view of the data at any given time. The existence of a data catalog in the marketplace changes this. It essentially creates one view of the data, which everyone in the data provisioning process shares in common, which always reflects the latest comprehensive expression of the state of data in each set. This allows them to work together around the same information to manage data more quickly and efficiently on behalf of the business. So this report shows the completeness of data documentation by source owner and gives us a complete view of exactly which source owners are doing a bang-up job in documenting the various pieces of their source metadata and which ones are lagging behind.
It's a report card.
It's a report card, a scorecard, a balanced scorecard. Another important role, and probably the most important one these days when we talk about security, is the management of user access controls, and the catalog enables this as well. While it's not exactly exposing new insights from the data, it's a critical prerequisite to you in getting large groups access to the data in the marketplace. Without robust access control, which can be easily administered and maintained at scale, most corporate security teams will never let the data lake be put into full production. Unlike ETL tools and data warehouses, data lakes persist data across its life cycle from raw to ready. And different groups of users need access to data at different points in the life cycle, depending upon their need. So starting from the bottom, someone in IT or the data preparation team, like a data steward, needs access to the data in its most raw form. I can't say the word rawest. When it first comes into the lake to make sure the data was onboarded properly, that it's of good quality, not corrupt or inaccurate. And at Podium, we get our name from these layers. We call this the bronze layer. A data scientist or analyst at that middle level, the silver layer, might want the data in a clean, raw form so that they can build their own data set and model. And business analysts or other users in lines of business teams might want a gold standard of data that's been fully conformed, documented and cleaned up to match corporate master data and reporting standards. The data catalog makes it possible to manage what data each set of users has access to as data progresses from bronze to silver or gold. Individual users get assigned to groups. Data is assigned to data collections, and groups are given access to data collections depending upon their needs. And the data catalog can capture and administer these access privileges at scale and automatically make the process easier and more secure.
Okay, let me jump in again.
Sure.
With a question. This is the same question in two different ways, but I'll share both. How can we leverage the data inside Podium for BI or running machine learning algorithms on it? Do I need to export the data out of Podium, or are there connections processes inside Podium? And a similar question was finding the data is one part of the story, which is done by the catalog. What analysis or data science tools can the catalog assets be added into, such as projects, notebooks? What will that flow look like? So I think there's something about sharing metadata there and something about data publishing.
Yeah, no, these are great questions. So the first thing I want to say is Podium is designed to be entirely open. So while we have a data catalog, the data that these questions alludes to in terms of using it for BI or machine learning, everything is done through open Hadoop calls to the cluster. So what that means is when we land data in the good, bad, ugly partitions after we've gone through our validation, that becomes a data set on the cluster. We manage the views of that through Hive and hCatalog. So your tool of choice for running against this information is really up to you, right? The metadata exists in our repository, and we have open API calls that allow you to integrate that information with other target systems.
And let me add something about that as well, just two examples. So for one of our customers where they built their data lake for a specific data analytics and science team, this is a pharma example, they use Podium to ingest all of these standard pharma industry healthcare sources. They onboard the data, doing everything Chris has been talking about. They do prepare jobs that help to enhance the data a little bit, and they write it out to tables in HDFS. And then the data scientists directly access the data in those tables using whatever tools they want to use. In another one of our customer accounts, a very large bank, they do something different. The IT organization is driving the data preparation process, bringing data from source environments through Podium, building some enhancements and standardization around the data, not too much. And then those, to speak back to what you're looking at now, those sort of silver layer data files are written out to two places. They're written out to a separate cluster that is solely the purpose, the sandbox of the data scientist team to do modeling and analytical work, but they're also written out into tables that become the source for a Tableau environment, which feeds more standardized downstream applications, specifically, in this case, branch scorecarding applications. So there's a number of different ways people get to that data for the purposes of analytics.
Good point.
And then what was the other question here? The other question had to do with, about metadata sharing, which I guess you addressed.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going, Chris.
Excellent. The last example where the catalog adds insight to the lake is with respect to bridging the gap between legacy environments and the new world of big data. And this I want to spend some time talking through. As companies build data lakes and move forward in using big data platforms, one of the key questions that our customers face is, what data should I bring into the lake and what data should I leave out? There's a number of considerations in making the decision, including the cost of bringing in and hosting it, along with data security concerns and other issues. But the catalog can play a power role in simplifying and taking the risk out of this decision as to what you put in the lake. We do this by allowing organizations to create a view of all the data sources in the environment, regardless of where that data actually sits, whether it's brought into the lake or not. So let me give you an example. There may be some data that you want, in quotes, all in. This is data that I want fully loaded into the marketplace and available at all times, instantly, on demand. Other data you might want nearby. You want it fully profiled, you want it cataloged, but it's okay if the data itself resides elsewhere, as long as you can go get it quickly on demand. And then lastly, there's other data that I just want on my radar. I want basic awareness of the data, but I don't need a full profile as long as I can get to the profile and the data quickly on demand. So that at the very least, right, if I look down that first column, I actually have source metadata from all systems. The catalog can include data at all three different levels to create a broad, inclusive view of data across the enterprise without actually requiring you to copy it all in. The key to our ability to do this goes back to that metadata wheel at the beginning. So in talking about all-in data that you want to bring on board and host in the lake, we do all the steps in that wheel. We collect the source metadata, we bring the data in, we do the complete validation, profiling, and PII detection. We add all of that into the catalog and keep them both, the data and the metadata, in the marketplace for us to use. In Podium, we call this managed. For nearby data, we complete the exact same process, but once we've finished the onboarding, we keep all of that rich metadata, but actually don't persist the actual data files. Instead, right, that metadata is now a part of the catalog where people can find it through a search, look at the profile data, and even see a data sample. If they want to use it and they have the proper access privileges, they can then onboard that data on demand for its use. In Podium, we call this registered. And then lastly, on my radar, which we call addressed, we only bring in the source metadata and add that to the data catalog. It's referenceable. Users in the lake can still see that that source data exists and look at the existing metadata describing it in the source environment. But if they want to use that data for real, they would need to onboard it. And that would kick off the metadata wheel that we love to refer to in earnest, driving the full onboarding, validation, profiling, and PII detection against it. In the end, the user will have full access to both the metadata and data via the catalog. So I hope what you can see is that this is really building a bridge in the data lake, allowing old and new to be accessible to the business via the lake, while also giving you flexibility in terms of what you're actually managing at any given point in time.
Let me actually interject a question here, which speaks exactly to this. So one of the questions that came in was, does Podium have a search discovery portal similar to Socrata? And I just looked up Socrata. I believe Socrata is a data aggregation site that brings together from various government agencies and gives people a view. And I think that gives us a chance, thinking about what Chris just said, to draw a distinction. So when we say Podium is a marketplace, what we are not saying is that we are in the business of bringing together and syndicating third-party data, like public data from government agencies or, credit scoring data of any of that. That certainly our product could be used for that, but we're not a data service provider in any way. We're about the integration of the data and the platform. We do sometimes in our free time dork with taking data from a source like Kaggle and putting it through Podium to expose insights that might not otherwise be available. But that's not our business model. However, I want to hark back to what Chris just said, that within organizations, we appreciate that as people move towards this different model of collecting and managing data, they need a lot of flexibility in what they really want to copy into the marketplace environment fully, and what they might want to be aware of through the catalog, but have at a moderate or more extended distance from the actual collection. And what Chris just talked about with those registered, managed, and addressed, or all-in, nearby, and on my radar data classifications is how we help to facilitate that inside an organization. Okay, and there's one other question that I'll throw in for you here. Catalogs help to provision a specific data set through self-service, and after access to a data set is approved, someone needs to extract the data and provide it to the requester. Is that a correct understanding? I think that's a question of self-service or business-ready on-demand versus full self-service.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? We've taken an approach here to talk about data delivery and really emphasize the importance of the catalog. But really what we're talking about is the data delivery process, right? So by bringing a data set into Podium and providing this rich catalog of data, we actually have provided the mechanism through our application for that data to be available to that user who has requested it, either on demand or on their behalf, right? There's a whole set of capabilities within Podium to further provision data to downstream systems. So one of the examples Barb gave in talking about data preparation and providing access is leveraging a module in our platform called Publish and pushing to a Tableau server. We have other customers populating the TISA data marts, right, with data that's been transformed in the platform. Integral to all of this is the catalog. The catalog is what's driving the self-service access to information. One more example of a way that a customer has used this in their environment to truly make onboarding and access a fully self-service model. They have set up a template that they bring in through a portal, and any business unit within this company, if they want data in the lake, fills out this template that contains all of the appropriate source metadata, and in an automated fashion, that source metadata is read. The location of the files that are going to be sourced are run. They're tested to make sure that they get 100% good records. And if that process succeeds, they promote that metadata and code through their development, QA, SIT, and production environments, so that users can actually, within a matter of hours, be looking at production data in the marketplace. I hope that answered your question.
you don't mind, let me keep going with a couple more here, too.
Sure.
So Michael here has asked the same question twice, and I forgot him before. The question was,
Did I not answer?
No, I forgot to ask.
Oh.
Is it on-prem, SaaS, cloud? What is it?
Oh, wonderful question. So we license our product on a subscription basis. We do not host it. You are welcome to install on a cluster behind your firewall or in the cloud. And we have customers who've done both. And we've actually had customers set up Podium to run on servers behind their firewall, accessing cloud-based systems. So you license our software and run on any configuration that you'd like.
Awesome. And another one was, does Podium provide any APIs to interact with the data lake? For example, we'd like to show the data quality percentages of data in lakes. How do we do that? Maybe this is about, can you put this against an existing Hadoop data collection?
Yeah. So, well, two things, right? So one is for an existing Hadoop data collection, right? A lot of folks that we talk to really want to understand the data that they've already ingested, right? Many of our customers have ingestion frameworks that they've already developed, right? And that may not have scaled. They were struggling to scale those and needed a new way of doing things. And what we're often told is, my data is good, my data is clean, it takes too many people to get the data in. One of the things that we've done is we've actually registered, right, that nearby category, the data in their lake, in order to profile it and get those data quality stats, and we can actually show them that actually their data quality may not be what they thought it was. In terms of exposing additional statistics, we provide a complete set of REST APIs by which you can interrogate the metadata. So if you have your own application or you're looking to integrate, say, with some other system, you can leverage those APIs in order to share information bidirectionally. Okay,
and there's a couple more questions here, but before we get to that, I just want to share one thing, because I know as we reach the top of the hour, many of you will disappear off to do your jobs. And that's this. Tomorrow, when you get a note with a recording of this and some follow-up materials, I'm going to send you a Gartner report and some of the things that are on message. I'm going to include a link to a survey to ask a couple questions about what your interest is in data catalogs. And I'm going to anonymize the information, and I'm going to aggregate it and send it out to you. So we have about 150 people who are participating today, and who each have a different point of experience in using a catalog in a lake. And I'm going to ask all of you to share a few things about that and then send it back to you so you can sort of see yourself in this group of people, where you are in your need, what your use case is, what your key concerns are, and so forth. And maybe that'll be interesting for the group. Okay, having said that, there's another question I want to share, Chris, which is, what is the process of validating whether data getting ingested into the lake is already cataloged in Podium? So how do we do duplicate data detection?
Yeah, great question. So both the PII and duplicate data detection really is a benefit that gets derived from our single pass data profiling that occurs when you ingest the data. We're able to take the frequency distributions and the profiling statistics for a given data set, right, and do pattern recognition, right, in the case of, say, PII. In the case of duplicate data detection, what we actually do is we generate a SHA key based on the full set of profiling statistics. So in other words, we send to this algorithm, which is designed to generate a unique key based upon some statistics, and any input for that matter. We use the profiling statistics. And then we do a lookup of that against other data sets that have been loaded so that we can identify, right, which two data sets have the same profile. And so that's the way that that works.
Okay. So Chris, a question came in about Podium versus competitors, and Calibra was mentioned in particular. Maybe it's a chance to talk about, general governance tools versus governance of the lake.
Sure. And that goes back to this whole, catalog versus data lake or marketplace management. So I actually don't view Calibra as a Podium competitor. I think they're, if you held up a Venn diagram, there are some areas of overlap in terms of what we do. But in terms of the full scope and context of what we're both providing, I think that overlap makes sense, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So a tool like Calibra is really an enterprise governance tool, right? Yes, it has a catalog whereby you define, really design your business model, including not only data elements, but also rules and policies and regulations, right? Laws that govern specific data elements. And you can establish applications and data sharing agreements, right, across various. Does a level of documentation of enterprise terms and can also profile source data. What we have done in Podium is actually synergistic and complementary with Calibra, and we have a number of customers who are actually using APIs in order to integrate the two products. With Calibra focused on the full enterprise, Podium's focus and governance as it relates to that data marketplace, the big data that's either under its control or is nearby or accessible. So I see them as very complementary, and again, we've got multiple customers integrating these two because they see that as well.
And I see a follow-up with more detail on Calibra, and so for the person asking that question, we are going to follow up with you directly and sort of parse out a little bit of the different Calibra products and how we compare. So there's one last question, and then we'll call it a day. This question is about lineage, about what does Podium provide in terms of lineage, but it also alludes to stored procedures, and I wonder if the question is lineage prior to Podium coming in, as well as within Podium.
Yeah, that's a great question. So within the Podium environment, because we're managing this environment, everything that's done within Podium is tracked. And so within the application, you're able to see the provenance of any element, where it came from, and how it was derived. And for that matter, where something that's come in has ultimately been used. And that includes, in the example I gave before, if it was published to some external system. The metadata model within Podium is extensible, and we've had this request from others. If I'm using, Informatica or something else to transform data prior to Podium, can that lineage also be collected? And we can certainly extend the model in order to integrate that external lineage. We don't automatically search for it. It does need to be provided to us, but we've got enough people who recognize that this catalog has so much value to them that there are things beyond just what it's managing that they'd also like to get in there.
Great. All right, and so I just want to conclude by thanking Chris for being our speaker today and for sharing his comments and thoughts, and to all of you for taking time to be with us. Again, we're recording this. I'll send around a link to a recording with some other stuff tomorrow, and you can see Chris's email here on the screen, cortega@Podium Data. I'm sure he would be happy to speak with any of you individually going forward if there's further things you want to dig into.
I look forward to it.
And with that, I am going to end today's webinar.
Thank you, everyone.